Namaste and welcome to College Admissions Strategy, brought to you by Empowerly, your trusted college admissions partner, right here on Radio Nyra in North Carolina. I'm your host, Raj, and today we're talking about something every parent wants to understand. When should we really start preparing for college? Because let's be honest, between school, sports, and everything else, it's hard to know what to do when, what matters when. So, to guide us through this journey, we have Laura Van Royen. Hi, Laura.
Hi.
An Empowerly expert counselor and North Carolina local who's worked with dozens of families right here in the Triangle area. After graduating from Harvard College with a degree in molecular and cellular biology and psychology, Laura worked in biotech and is now pursuing a PhD in pharmacology at UNC Chapel Hill. With over 6 years of college admissions experience, she's guided students into the top universities, including Ivy League, MIT, Stanford, UC Berkeley, UCLA, and Duke, as well as competitive BS and MD programs. Passionate about supporting pre-med, STEM, and first-generation students, Lara brings both expertise and empathy, especially when guiding those who are the first in their family to navigate the U.S. college admissions process. Welcome, Lara.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the kind introduction. I'm very excited today to talk all our families through essentially what they need to think about from year to year with their students.
Great. Well, let's start at the beginning. 8th grade. Most parents think 8th grade's a little too early, but does it really matter?
It matters, but not for grades. So the first grades that college admissions officers will see in a transcript is from ninth grade onwards. But eighth grade is a fantastic foundation year. This is the year where students should start thinking about their habits, how to manage studying, extracurriculars, sleep, friends. Also, this should be the time where they are really building a strong academic foundation, especially in core subjects like math and English. And last of all, this is the time where they should be exploring extracurriculars. They should be figuring out what works for them, what they're interested in, and essentially kind of building that foundation for when they get to ninth grade onwards.
Awesome. So it's more about exploration than achievement.
Absolutely.
Great. So what changes once they get to ninth grade?
Absolutely. So ninth grade is the time where your grades really start to count. So I try to tell families, try not to overload yourself. Definitely try to explore academically. Try and help your student figure out what they're most interested in. But this is really a big adjustment for lots of students moving from 8th to ninth grade academically. So we definitely don't want to overload students, but we still want to put them on the path to eventually taking challenging courses, but still performing well in ninth grade. Secondly, this is the time when extracurricular exploration also starts to count. This is the time where they're able to explore what extracurriculars they're enjoying, what kind of sounds impactful for their future careers. And it's also a time for them to start thinking a little bit more long term. Is this potentially an extracurricular that I could get involved in? And maybe by the time that I get to 11th and 12th grade, get a leadership position and really make an impact there. That's the foundation for ninth year.
Nice. What about like relationships?
Absolutely. This is also a great time for students to really just start building relationships with some potential letter of recommendation writers later on. This is something that we want to think about for all years of high school, but eventually when it comes to the college application process, we want to make sure that your student has at least 2 to 3 teachers, counselors, mentors that they have really deep relationships with who can really speak to your student's character.
Awesome. So once you've like settled into high school, where should they start focusing on when they get to 10th grade?
Yes, great question. So this is what we like to call a growth year. So this is where they can build on the foundation that they've hopefully built in grade 8 and grade 9. They can start challenging themselves a little bit, maybe with more challenging AP courses, whatever sounds achievable to the student. This is also the time where they can start dialing in their extracurricular strategy. They can start determining which extracurriculars they want to focus in on, and they can also really start thinking more about how to go above and beyond within those extracurriculars. At the end of the day, what college admissions officers are looking for is not just a list of I've been part of this club or that club. They want real stories of impact and how you've been able to contribute to an organization
Mhm.
over time.
Nice. Okay, tell me about like community involvement and like test taking time.
Absolutely. So, this is actually the year that we start thinking a little bit more about having students, at the very least, just take a diagnostic SAT or ACT test. These are available for free online. And they're a really good way for students to just determine, first of all, which test should they be taking eventually. So, college admissions does not prefer the SAT or the ACT, but each test plays to students' different strengths. So, this is a great time for them to determine, first of all, where they're at, how much preparation will be needed for their eventual test, and also which test they should look into taking. Then, like you mentioned, in terms of community service, 10th grade is a fantastic time to get involved. Really try to build a story of whether that is in their school community or the broader community, just the ways in which they are actually contributing, the ways in which they are passionate about making a difference.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I definitely think PSATs are super underrated and any practice thing like that.
Absolutely, 100%.
Let's talk about maybe like college exploration.
Yes, so 10th grade is as well a great time to think a little bit more about what kind of colleges could be the right fit for the student, right? We oftentimes have in our mind these really selective colleges, and absolutely those could be good options. But at the very end of the day, we want to build what we call a risk stratified college list, so full of reaches, targets, and safeties. And 10th grade is a really good time to just start exploring what colleges are there in your area and also just in the nation that might be a really good fit for their student, especially as they're kind of starting to get an idea of what their academic path might look like and what their priorities might look like. And this is something we can build on as well in 11th grade and onwards.
Great. Any tips for 10th graders?
Yes, great question. So I think one of the big tips, right, is to make sure that we are thinking about overall what kind of uniqueness can we bring to the college admissions process. It's a very hard thing to think about, but we like to just start thinking a bit more about, can students think of something that they're really passionate about, and can they potentially approach it from different angles? So if we have students, for example, that are very interested in pursuing the medical field, maybe they can approach that from a volunteering angle, volunteering at a nursing home. They can also potentially approach that from a science angle, learning a little bit more about the human body, kind of taking AP classes in terms of, anatomy, physiology, things like that. It's a
Hmm.
good tip.
Okay, great. And do you think they should be like keeping track of this somewhere, like a resume or?
That's a great question. So, 10th grade is a fantastic time as we start getting a little bit more involved in extracurriculars, hopefully starting to make a larger impact. This is a fantastic time to create a spreadsheet, whatever works for the particular student, just to make sure that we are tracking the metrics that are eventually going to count. So, for example, if we have a student who volunteers as a tutor, a great thing for them to start tracking is more or less how many hours a week they're spending on that, but also how many students that they're impacting, because that's going to be something that's very important when it actually comes down to application time, that they're able to just say, I've impacted this many students, and I've maybe spent this much time overall
That's a
contributing.
that's a pretty great idea, and it really helps them also reflect and see where they want to go.
Absolutely.
So when does college prep really start?
Yes, so this is where we move to the 11th grade. So the 11th grade is really a time to continue building on all of the things that I've talked about before. This is a time to really start dialing in, what does your college list look like? What are those reach schools, those dream schools that you're going to go for? But also, what are the target schools and the safety schools that you're also really excited and passionate about? This is a time to potentially start doing some more college visits. This is also time to start figuring out, based on my dream school, what could a potential competitive profile for me look like? So oftentimes for students, this is the year in which they are potentially taking on leadership roles in terms of their extracurriculars. They are hopefully have found kind of some extracurriculars that they're really passionate about, some that they're able to really go above and beyond for, is what we always look for, right? We don't want extracurriculars where students are just showing up and doing what they're instructed to do. We ideally want them to show some initiative, some leadership, and to kind of think a little bit more about how they can expand existing initiatives potentially within their extracurriculars. This is an especially important year to either continue building relationships with a letter of recommendation writers they met earlier on during their high school career, or if they haven't yet made those kind of deep kind of connections, 11th grade is the perfect year to really kind of invest, especially maybe in their more challenging classes, their challenging AP classes, AP chemistry, biology, physics, whatever it might be for a particular student, to see if they can get a strong letter of recommendation that not only speaks to their personal qualities, but can also talk a little bit about their academic abilities in a very challenging topic. The other thing we start having kind of students think a little bit more about is, this is the year where we want to actually start taking SATs and or ACTs, right? And starting to figure out where we're at, where that puts us in terms of where we want to be for our target and our reach schools.
Awesome. Okay, so how does Empowerly help with that like 11th grade?
Yes. Well, that is a fantastic question. So Empowerly is actually there to support students through all of these different years. We have what we call a roadmap system on our personalized Empowerly portal. And that essentially walks students through basically a checklist of all of the things I've discussed today. But really, we have counselors that walk students through every step, because basically what I've been talking about today is kind of broad, generalized advice, but each student has their own different passions. They have their own kind of goals. They have their own kind of complexities in terms of how they have to manage their time and the other things that are going on. So counselors like myself at Empowerly are really meant to give students individualized guidance, right? This is especially important as well when we start thinking about potentially in 11th grade pursuing something called a passion project. So a passion project is really just something that a student is really passionate about, some kind of self-driven activity that they're able to show initiative for. So this can be, for example, through doing an extracurricular at school. How can we expand that extracurricular to really impact the community in a larger way? It could be a student who is really into coding, building a fundamental kind of game for themselves, right? It can be a student who is really passionate about kind of volunteering with the elderly, hosting a large event within their community to raise funds for something meaningful, right? So that is especially a process that oftentimes takes lots of time. It involves lots of planning, and that's especially where a counselor like myself can
Awesome.
come in.
Yeah. So that like plan, the roadmap, your strategy plans year by year, I think that would
Absolutely.
probably be a huge relief for parents, like takes a lot off their back. And it really
Absolutely.
helps with like that last minute stress. Cause I feel like the admissions process starts and you're like, oh my God, I have to do all of these things. I only have 2 months.
Absolutely.
Like,
Absolutely. And at Empowerly, we really try to avoid that. We really try to make the stress of the process as minimal as possible. It is, of course, always going to be a big deal. It is, where your student is going to be spending the next 4 years of their life and is going to be changing so much, learning so much. But at the same time, there are lots of ways to minimize stress. And one of the biggest ways is to start nice and early so that by the time we get to the summer between our 11th and 12th grade, which is where we're going to start to be writing essays, specifically the 650-word common application essay, which is really just supposed to be a narrative of who we are, what we're passionate about, what meaningful and new do we have to bring to a college. We're prepared and we're not kind of, confused about where to start or how to showcase everything that we've done. And speaking of that, 12th grade is actually mostly the year that we think of as kind of the showcase year, right? So everything that you've built from ninth grade onwards, and even the foundation you've built before that, is really everything that comes out and shines in 12th grade. So 12th grade is the year where we really start thinking about digging into essays. So in addition to that common application essay that I mentioned, each school is also going to have their own supplementary essays, right? Now, oftentimes these essays ask students to describe extracurricular activities that they found especially meaningful, right? And basically our roadmap walks students through how to ideally start finding those. But these questions can also oftentimes ask them about meaningful moments that they've had. And that's where kind of keeping track of things also, might involve noting down particular stories where, a student was really able to maybe make a connection with someone at an old age home that they were volunteering with, or a time where a student had kind of an epiphany and had a breakthrough in terms of how they coded their website for their passion project or whatever the case might be. So counselors like myself at Empowerly also really work to help students kind of walk through that whole process of both noting down memorable events and also putting that in an essay submission ready form at the end of the day.
awesome. I know essays were definitely like a scary topic to move
Yes.
toward. I always put them off on my way. Okay. So we definitely have to also get into like recommendation letters now, I'm sure,
Absolutely.
and then
100%.
scholarships.
Yes, absolutely. Great question. So, in terms of letters of recommendation, hopefully, again, a student has been building relationships with potential letter of recommendation writers from their very start in high school. But what we ultimately want to end up with at the very end of the cycle, when we're actually starting to submit applications, is ideally plan for having 3 letters of recommendations. Depending on a student's major, we generally recommend that they have one recommender from some kind of STEM based topic, so someone who can just attest to a student's ability to work quantitatively. And then we also want to have some kind of letter of recommendation that's able to attest to their ability to write eloquently, to understand complex text, things like that. So that can sometimes be an English teacher, history, whatever the case might be. What we want to emphasize is even though that's important, the relationship is the most important, and what that letter of recommendation can really say about a student's character and their ability to contribute
When
to the
should
college.
they be asking for those?
That's a fantastic question. So we like to encourage students to ask for those at the very start of their 12th grade, just to make it nice and early, nice and easy. So when we think about the broad admissions process, like I've said, in the summer between your 11th and 12th grade years when you're going to be starting to write essays, but the first round of deadlines, which we call early action or early decision deadlines, are usually sometime in October or November. And then we have another wave of deadlines called regular decision deadlines, which are oftentimes very early January, but also spreading through the rest of January and into February. So while letter of recommendation writers might only need to get their letter of recommendations in, let's think mid-October or November, depending on which schools a student is applying to, asking earlier is always better. Gives the letter of recommendation writer some time to kind of iterate through
For sure.
really impactful anecdotes to tell about the student.
Nice. And
Yeah,
do you help with like scholarships? I know that would also take a lot off the not just their
absolutely.
backs, but off their wallets.
Absolutely, that's the goal for sure. So we understand at Empowerly, right? There are lots of things that kind of factor into a college decision, and one of the big things is how much money is the family actually going to need to be paying to attend that specific college. So absolutely, Empowerly helps with scholarships kind of all throughout a student's academic career. Where we really start kind of digging into scholarships is also in 12th grade. So, where we can get scholarships are a couple of different sources. We can get merit based scholarships from the institutions themselves. So, for example, if I'm helping a student apply to one school, I might also help them write essays and put together applications for that school's merit scholarships, which are oftentimes nice and substantial kind of benefits to the students' wallets. But we also help students find and apply to outside scholarships where there might be nonprofits or other businesses that are willing to kind of support students through their educational journey.
Awesome. Okay, so I love that you take like the overwhelming stuff and you make it super clear. But for
It's the
families
goal.
listening right now, what is your best advice to get started?
Yes, that's a fantastic question. My best advice to get started would be to try to create just an overall outline of this is the roadmap that we can go on. Like I said, at Empowerly, we really help students kind of tackle that bit by bit. But overall, the best kind of advice to give is to make sure that students have something about them that they can really kind of contribute to the overall kind of college environment and make sure that they are starting nice and early. So on our website, empowerly.com, we have lots of webinars, we have articles giving advice on all of the topics that I've talked about today. So I think that's a really great place to start as students and their families sit down, start to figure out a roadmap. Where are they now? Where do they need to get at to get to the colleges that they're hoping to apply to?
Awesome. So I know you have like a team of former admissions officers and
Absolutely.
lots of
We do.
experts. Do you just kind of assign a student there, or like is there a
Yes.
matching
That's
system?
a fantastic question. So we actually have over 200 advisors. So lots of them are former admissions officers, so people who used to work in the admissions office who know exactly what to look for and how to help a student get to what they'd eventually look for. But essentially, in terms of the process of matching students, very often we have what's called MYC or Meet Your Counselor sessions, where we essentially have our fantastic sales team matching a student and their family with three potential counselors that could be good fits for them. The student and their family get to meet each counselor individually, just make sure that they're a good fit with the counselor in terms of advising style, in terms of personality fit, in terms of all of those kind of really critical things for somebody who's going to be guiding your student through potentially the whole high school and college application process. And then ultimately, the student and their family gets to choose before they get started with an advisor like myself.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. That's such practical and like reassuring advice. And Laura, you're so great. Thank you so much for coming today. And parents, remember, college admissions is not about last minute perfection. You can't cram for it like an exam. It's about the whole consistent growth and the whole
absolutely.
roadmap from all the way from middle school. And Empowerly can help you and your family and your teen build a personalized roadmap from middle school all the way to college.
Absolutely.
And that'll be accompanied, of course, with expert guidance from people like Laura. And so definitely check out Empowerly. Don't miss our next episode. And until then, keep dreaming big for your team. This is your host, Raj from Radio Nyra.